All right, y'all. Welcome. We're going to get started with our foraging event, our foraging show and tell. My name is Al Mason, and I'm based here in Charleston, South Carolina. I forage as a hobby. I've been foraging since as long as I can remember, but we'll get more into our foraging stories soon. And I'll let Robbie and Krisz introduce themselves. So welcome, y'all.
Hey, thanks, Al. I'm Robbie Love. I am coming from Bellingham, Washington today. Spent a few years in this bioregion. I've also spent some time in Wisconsin, Central America, East Coast, and am excited to dive into foraging with y'all. Talk about experiences that we've had.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina, and I'm talking to you today from Davis, California. I am not from here, but I'm visiting here. And I've also spent some time in the Cascadia bioregion, the Great Lakes bioregion, and all over the planet. And I didn't grow up foraging. It was a learned skill as an adult. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about foraging.
Awesome. And we're going to do this really panel style. So we'll be asking each other questions, sharing bits of stories, going back and forth, really all playing the role of facilitator here. And we will at the end have time for Q&A if anyone wants to join in and participate in that. And so I'll really just start from the top where we talked about diving in with just like distilling the mystery of like what is foraging, and we could even just start with what is foraging for you. And I was inspired by hearing each of you share also other regions or bioregions that you foraged. I too foraged from Great Lakes. I'm from that area, from Michigan, so that's where I first started my foraging as adventures as a very little human, not knowing that it was called foraging, but foraging nonetheless. And also experience in the tropics doing some foraging. So I'd say most of my foraging journey, where I knew the word even, has taken place here in the Southeast bioregion of the United States. I'm in a very subtropical climate. For those of you who are plant people or familiar with zones, I'm in zone 9A technically. So very little frost per year, not quite tropical. So we get a very interesting intersection of plants from temperate climates, cooler climates, and then plants all the way down to tropical, which you might experience more in Florida, those warmer climates. So I'm in this very curious zone where we get a mix of everything. That's a lot of biodiversity, and a lot of the foraging, and what foraging is to me here in this place, it's very much a practice that is just, it's a hobby, it's a pastime, and it's something that I also enjoy to connect with the timing of the natural world. So for me, what foraging is really what it does for me and how I interact with the concept of foraging, of going out into untamed spaces, sometimes even cultivated spaces, but especially the forest, public spaces where there are plants that are either edible or medicinal that are growing. And usually I am taking small parts of those plants in order to take it home and infuse it in something I'm cooking or something I'm making into a tea or a vinegar or a tincture. And so it's really taking pieces of plants from places outside of cultivated spaces. That's what foraging is to me, in a very, very oversimplified way.
Hey, thanks, Allie. There was a lot of what you said that resonates with me as well. And I want to speak to what you shared about foraging before knowing the word. Because linguistics is such an important part of how we interact with the world. And this experience of relating with nature and the world around us, the living worlds that we're a part of, to me is foundational to the foraging experience. So no matter what word we put to it, just getting outside and interacting with the living worlds is central to foraging for me. I also started picking plants when I was young, and I suppose collecting reptiles and amphibians as a little guy could be considered a form of foraging too. The first time that I picked a plant in nature and consumed it knowingly was also in Michigan. This is in the UP, in the Sylvania Wilderness area. Um, one of the wilderness educators out there showed me wood sorrel, which is an oxalis, I believe, and it's got this great citric acid flavor. Um, and yeah, so that was the first time, and I was just fascinated and blown away by the fact that there are things out in the world around me that could provide sustenance and support, and that became a really potent way of interacting with the world. Um, it has expanded for me. The fungal kingdom or kingdom, as Robin Wall Kimmerer says, is really central to my experiences. Foraging for fungi is one of the things that really gives me life. And then I've recently started experimenting with foraging for animal life too. So finding bones and harvesting mussels from the sea, and oysters are some newer adventures for me that people have been engaging with ad infinitum. So engaging with that unbroken human history of relating to the world around us. That's a big part of it for me too. But really just getting out and spending time in whatever setting we're in, because even in the most urban environment, we find things that we can forage.
Thanks, y'all, for sharing your ideas of foraging. It's really fun for me to hear. My experience, as I mentioned, started as an adult. So I'm pretty sure that my first foraging experience was with fungi. And that was really nowhere near here or the Great Lakes. That was in northern Alberta. So I don't know what zone that is exactly. I think it's probably around 4. So most of the year would not be really forageable unless you're ice fishing or something. Winter foraging is a whole other thing, I guess. But yeah, just like for me, foraging definitely has this obvious human component, and I didn't feel comfortable foraging, which is probably why it took me so long to get started without someone showing me what was edible, like what was I looking at, and giving me like the 100% go ahead. This is an organism that I can consume. And once I had that relationship, made that relationship with the human, I could deepen my relationship with the non-human kin. And I've really carried that forward, I feel like, because moving on from there and going to Haida Gwaii, where I then foraged for more mushrooms, I recognized that I needed to have a relationship with the human community in order for them to even share with me where edible mushrooms are, and also to know that I respect the land, I respect them, and that I'm going to have more of a reciprocal relationship with the land rather than just taking from the land. And that's something that we're going to talk about later on today about the honorable harvest. And I really think that that's key for me when I think about foraging, is just this deepened relationship between humans, like one-on-one humans or group of humans, and with the land in a reciprocal way. So anytime I'm taking something, I offer something back. And I'm really grateful that I started my foraging journey with mushrooms because, like Robbie said, I feel energized when I forage for mushrooms. I think they're very special little beings. are big beings. And then really foraging for plants didn't start for me until living in community. And again, having those people that knew what the plants were, how to identify them, made me feel more confident about how to go about foraging and deepen that relationship. So the humans are definitely very important for me in the foraging world.
It's fun to hear the different words that we use for like foraging versus hunting might be another word. And like, what's the distinction between the two is what I thought of when I hear mushrooms seem to be a bridge between foraging and hunting, and funny enough, because they're closer to the animal kingdom than they are the plant kingdom at the same time. And I wonder if there's some part of that that feels very right to say mushroom hunting. It's like foraging is also, it's like a scavenger hunt. Like when it's energizing, it's that same joy, even that same like dopamine hit you get from finding something. And then not only that, but finding something you recognize. It is like I spy, but even better, you get to usually eat it or take it home with you or investigate it. So there's a lot of fun that can be had. And in my mind, that's why I prefer to do foraging. And like I have the privilege to do foraging as a hobby. And for some, it's also like a very regular form of sustenance. There's many reasons that one would forage. And so when I say foraging throughout this conversation, I'll be referring typically to plants, also some mushrooms, versus like hunting, something that you would, like an animal you'd take out of the wild, or foraging is like a different form of harvesting. I heard you say like mussels and oysters, Robbie. So it's fun, and there's many nuances we could follow to define what it is, but it's fun to hear like everyone's current take of it. And I'm sure my idea of what foraging is will continue to evolve. And the next thing that, and I'll pass the mic to one of y'all to start on this next topic that we had discussed we want to share as a group is where would you go foraging? Where would I begin? Like I'm here sitting in the city. Y'all are probably wondering where would she forage if she's not in a forage, if she's not in forest. So I'm curious to know what advice y'all have for folks tuning in about where one could forage, and then also maybe where we maybe shouldn't forage or where we wouldn't recommend foraging.
Yeah, cool. I don't mind starting that. Since I am on the more familiar with the northern border, so in the Canada political area, I'll let y'all talk about like BLMs and places like that. But in Canada, if you're tuning in from there, or if you happen to be foraging there, there is land called Crown land, and that's essentially public land that has a complicated history in terms of who actually owns that land and how it was actually stolen. But you can forage there, and no one's going to ticket you or get you in trouble. So in terms of just logistically, if you're looking to forage, those are lands that you can forage. Typically in national parks, that's not a place that you can forage. They are going to regulate those areas, and there will be rangers that might ticket you. So those are places that you don't want to forage. Other places that you could forage is obviously private property. So even if you don't have your own private property, maybe you have a friend that has private property, or maybe there is like a property in the area that the community knows of, that has a relationship with the community and it's just open to people wandering. Kind of depends on your community and the culture around that. In my experience, where there are a lot of humans that have a lot of foraging knowledge, there is a little bit more like shared access to land, I'd say, because everyone kind of understands that this is a really important part of life and they want to share that abundance. Other places that I wouldn't forage are near trains and highways, anywhere that there's going to be obvious pollutants. So even in like the Great Lakes area, for example, there's a lot of mining projects and they dump some of that into the Great Lakes. So the water could look clean, but it might not be. So if you're foraging for something that's near the lake's edge, you'd want to know what industrial activities are going on around you potentially. Yeah, that's all I can think off the top of my head right now, but maybe come back to me if I think of something else.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. So as far as where to forage and where not to forage, I touched a little bit earlier on the idea of no matter where you are, um, foraging can be an opportunity to get in touch with your surroundings. I think probably interesting for anybody watching this. It looks like I'm the only one in a forest right now. You can see the big Douglas fir behind me. And I'll switch my camera around just so you can see a little bit. It's a forest right on the edge of a city. A lot of Douglas fir, grand fir, and there are quite a few things that I could forage right within my immediate vicinity. We've got this Mahonia here. They've got these beautiful yellow roots that contain a compound called berberine, which is quite medicinal. However, this forest area is an arboretum, and so the rules of the area say not to disturb any of the vegetation. And so ironically, this might be the worst area to be foraging for anything out of any of the three of us. Yeah, and so I find even in suburban and urban contexts, you can do some great foraging. As Christina mentioned, regulations. It's important to get to know what the regulations are in your area. So yeah, BLM is great in the States. A lot of the state and national parks and forests have set allowances. So just figuring out what the permitted amounts are in those areas. I think we'll talk a little bit more about foraging practices as we continue on. But yeah, private land, it's always good to get permission from the owner if you can. Otherwise, it's technically trespassing and it can end in some pretty dicey situations. So always good to be careful about that. Christina mentioned paying attention to pollutant streams as well. In addition to railroad tracks and highway edges, I would say to exercise extreme caution in industrial areas. So sometimes you'll be walking through an industrial park, and this morning I was and saw some black locusts that were right in flower. Some really nice flowers, beautiful smells, and to me, there's sort of like a Lucky Charms flavor, like nature's Lucky Charms, and probably not the best place to pick and consume those flowers, unless you know what the practices are from the people operating in that area. And then knowing what the organism that you're looking for does with some of these pollutants too. So if it's an organic pollutant and it's a mushroom that you're picking, odds are good the fungi will have broken down the organic pollutant. Of course, I always recommend exercising caution rather than boldness in this regard, and knowing exactly what the pollutant is and how the fungi would deal with it, which can be learned over time. But if it were something like a heavy metal contaminant, then you absolutely don't want to touch those fungi because they can bioaccumulate, making it a lot more dangerous. So yeah, I also find that foraging for me means that I have to know the area a lot better too. I got to know what energies and substances are moving through the area, including local regulation. Yeah, but pretty much anywhere there can be an opportunity.
Yeah, I like how you added that caveat of it's not just the where, but the when and the where, because I could go somewhere that, let's say I'm looking for, I want to harvest magnolia flowers and I'm in an area full of them, but it's not the season. It could be that simple even. So it's getting to know the timing of plants, and just familiarity with place in general. So I like that timing part, because that's definitely something that you can learn through observation, by walking through areas regularly, where you start to recognize the time of blooms, or if you want to eat shoots of a plant when it starts to leaf out at first in the spring or another season. So it's, yeah, adding that layer of the when, and by answering the where, like where should I forage, where should I not? I'll start with not, because I just heard these 4 R's recently that were like, oh, and I think y'all have said, I think all of them, but it helped me remember. It's roadways, residences, right of ways, and I have my notes over here, railroads. So roadways and railroads typically because of pollutants that are in there, and residences and right of ways typically because of like rights and access. And I think some of the exceptions, especially here being in the city for residences, is trees and plants will hang over the sides of fences. And it's this abundance, this extra that's sharing, intentional or not, and often very intentional, especially if it's fruit trees. That's just, it's extra. And so even like the funny thing where you're sitting, Robbie, in an arboretum, which it's like abundant, but not to be harvested from. That's also the difference with foraging is, in a cultivated space, like it's maybe typically not considered foraging, that would be farming even, versus foraging is more in wild spaces that aren't intentionally planted to grow that way, because it's a lot of a finding game. We're letting nature provide these things, at the will of her timing and whatever is sprouting forth in that soil. So another distinction there with foraging and not foraging. And then where to forage, I'll add, y'all have covered most of what I would have thought of. And I'll also add like my perspective in a very urban setting. So I often go walking through, there's a park a few blocks down my street, and it's very big and it is abundant in all sorts of stuff that is unseemingly edible. And I say that because I don't often see other people picking and eating things that I notice are edible, which it's fun. It's like a little treasure that I feel like I get to have, and share with those who are curious about it. Also, a lot of the plants, when I'm harvesting parts of them, I'm making sure they're in abundance, that it's, being around other people at the park, it's not like, what is she doing? Or someone from the park authority saying I can't do that. And of course, if they asked me to, I would stop doing that. But in the meantime, I have been enjoying harvesting from my local park. And I have some things I'm going to show and tell. I just went on a walk right before this, which I harvested just from down the street in the middle of a city. So I mentioned residences, things that hang over the side of fence, even pocket parks. In cities, you'll be surprised at what sprouts up. And like Robbie mentioned, and you too, Krisz, like to be aware of pollutants, because a lot of city is bordered by roads. There's a lot of roadside, just surface area along the borders. That's what the edges are. So finding something that's far enough away from stormwater splashback in the road, and finding those neutral spaces as well, and thinking about the history of that property. In city spaces, there's lots of brownfields, lots of junkyards that have been paved over or covered over. So it's, again, good to get to know your place, and that can also start to inform what's maybe a great spot to forage and what's not so much. And in a more like positive light in terms of like history of the land, there might be areas that were previously farmed. And so that could indicate very loamy soil. That you might have plants that are really excited about being in that. And then also a lot of wild plants, which are very medicinal, thrive in poor soil because they have these secondary compounds, these very bitter or more bitter than anything else, bitter, sometimes sour components that are very medicinal for us, that are the same things, the chemicals that they produce under stress, which also prevent pests from eating them, but they're the same properties that are very potent for us. So all these wonderful things to think about. It's a long list, but essentially it can boil down to just be aware of whose land it is, if you're allowed to have access, what took place there before, and just to pause and look around you, what's going on around me, whether others are, if it seems like it's okay, is there someone I can ask if it's okay, or is it generally considered okay to be picking from this area? Let's see, is there anything else I want to add? I take a few notes because I tend to forget what I want to say when I'm really excited about a topic. What else? Private property, wilderness. And I think from there, it's really about knowing what to forage. So I brought a few items I'd love to show and tell with y'all. And this is just from my walk that I just did, just a very short walk. I went out and we'll share and show what we use to go on our walks. It's really helpful to have a foraging kit. So I'll share a few of those items as I introduce these, but save that for a separate moment in case y'all want to write these down. So when I took a walk here at Hampton Park, one of the first things I noticed were these beautiful magnolia trees in bloom, Magnolia grandiflora. So this one's just starting to open, and this one has opened up fully. I have one petal that I lost. It's a really beautiful flower. It's huge. It's evolutionary. It's very old. When I remove the petals from the stem, it actually leaves a leaf scar, which shows me what it evolved from. They're super fragrant, and I foraged it not just because it smells good or because even they're in abundance, but I love infusing these into sweet rice vinegar, and it makes this really floral, yummy dressing. It's a little bit rosy, but it's wild, so it has that rose essence to it. So that's one thing I foraged. And another thing is, like, when I went on my walk, it's an out and back walk instead of a loop. So what I did is I walked out and I observed on my way what I might want to pick up on my way back, because some of these are very tender. So if I were to put it in my bag at the beginning of my foraging trip, it might be crushed by the end of it, because I only brought an over shoulder bag for this foraging walk instead of more of a hard basket to protect things. So even if I punch my thumbnail into it, you can already see some bits where it's a little bit brown just from gently getting bumped. So if we want to preserve the look or quality or texture, that's something I think about, is the order of harvesting. And a few more flowers that I was stoked to see is mimosa, or albizia, was flowering out there, out and about. This is everywhere right now at this time of year in Charleston. Smells incredible. I love putting this in my water and just sipping on it. It's very light, it's very joyful, just like the look of it. We often call plants that what they do for your body is kind of, you can see it in what they look like. It's the doctrine of signature. And so this little joyful puffball that really just reminds me of joy, it's actually really good for your adrenals and for working with grief. So it's fun to have this around. And then a few other things that I found. I also harvested some mulberry leaves. So mulberry fruits have finished here in Charleston. It's no longer mulberry fruit foraging season, which they're incredibly abundant. If you park your car on almost any main street this time of year, or about a few weeks ago, it will be covered in bird shit because the mulberries are just a favorite food. But the leaves are really high in minerals. So vinegar does a great job at extracting minerals. So I'm going to make mulberry infused vinegar. Water also extracts well, so I can make a tea. But I don't like the taste of mulberry tea because it tastes like I'm drinking spinach juice. So I could put other stuff in there, but I really like the vinegar aspect, and then it keeps for a while. I don't have to drink my tea all at once. One thing I'll note is, you might notice, maybe you didn't, this is just the end of a branch. Typically, I wouldn't just pull off an end of a branch. This tree is actually going to be cut down. It's a dying tree in my side yard. So I was a little bit more haphazard with how I picked these leaves. And otherwise, I would have more carefully cut these leaves. And there's many techniques that are great to be mindful of when you bring tools and clean tools. Although wild plants tend to be more resilient than farmed plants, I think, Using clean tools prevents the plant from getting infected, and making small cuts instead of big cuts also, blocks any or is less surface area for a plant to get infected. It's like thinking about if you had to amputate your pinky, which I hope no one ever does, you'd want a very small cut instead of something that's long, right? So you want to make it as clean as possible for your little plant that you're taking a cutting from, using clean tools and knowing what part of the plant to harvest. So I won't pluck off all the leaves on one branch. I'll pluck off a few leaves from several branches if I want a large quantity. Got 3 more things I found. I am so excited that pawpaws are just coming into season here in the Carolinas. This one's still a little green. I thought it felt squishy. It was totally my excitement in my head. But, and these typically want to ripen on the tree. So unfortunately, that's also a good thing to know. Will it ripen on my counter? So if I'm an excited forager and I see pawpaws, it's not like a banana. It's not going to ripen so much, at least not at this stage on my countertop. I'm going to have to wait till it's ripe and go back every week until it is. And that's what I will do. I will check the pawpaw trees every single day. And there were 2 varieties. There's actually a smaller pawpaw variety out there. These will get a little bit bigger, but this one's just about ripe, and it does tend to ripen a bit more on the countertop. So it's good to know those little nuances when you're picking things about readiness. The other 2 things, I did take the end of a plant here. This is smilax vine. And all these little fresh tips, the leaves are super tender, very rubbery, and the very ends of them, these shoots that crawl up, it's a crawling vine, you'll see closer to the base of the stem, there's usually lots of thorns. The root can be used. It's a very popular root used throughout Central America. It has many names. I know it as cuculmeca, a very red root that has tons of iron, but you can harvest the tips of it and it tastes like asparagus. So it's like free asparagus. It's also in abundance and most people don't like it, even though, oh, that one's spicy, very spicy, even though it's native here. What else? That is very spicy. I'm gonna have to actually spit them out. Yeah, I hope it was just spicy. So, get a real.
I love the sorry to interrupt while you recover from the spice. I love seeing the individual differences from plants too. So like some of them will have these really potent, yeah, exactly. The pawpaw, different sizes, and different stands will have different flavor characteristics. And then I always have to ask, like, yo, what is making these Saskatoon berries so sweet in this spot? Yeah, things like that.
I like that because I experienced that with the mulberries this year. I had favorite trees that were really sweet and some that were super dry and astringent, even though they were ripe or they even look the same. So yeah, that's huge. The soil might be a little different, or they might have some animal going to the bathroom under it, fertilizing the plant. So it totally depends. And the last thing I'll share, which I'm not going to put in my mouth, is a camphor tree. Not native, it is considered invasive here. But camphor, like camphor oil, if you were to crush it, it's super, super fragrant and has a bit of that like cinnamony, menthol type of smell. So what I use for this is I'll either hang it in my shower or crush it and make a steam. So I use it externally, and because it's in abundance and so much so that it's considered invasive actually, and it's not native to the region, I will harvest as much as I can, especially in the spring time when I just want to clear out, or because I like the smell in my shower instead of buying eucalyptus from the store. I can go harvest camphor just down the road. So those are a few of the things that I found, and I'd love for y'all to jump in with that before we ramble about tools for a bit in our foraging kits.
Sure, yeah, I'll jump in real quick. Yeah, I like that you pointed out the abundance, like the relative abundance of plants, and their ecosystem function, because that is just so important. You may find some plants that are profoundly medicinal or super tasty, but if they're rare, really uncommon, or are playing an important ecosystem function, even just for the moment, then it may be best not to pick those. One plant that comes to mind is the ghost pipe, the monotropa. In a lot of places, it's very, very uncommon. So it's profoundly medicinal and it can be super helpful. And there are only one or two regions that I know of where it's appropriate to harvest. But then things like, yeah, camphor, kudzu, the garlic mustard, there are tons of these. Some of them are known as invasive, some are opportunistic or simply aggressive or plentiful. Some are just ubiquitous, even if they are natural to the area. And so, yeah, I guess foraging also provides us with a way to know more about an ecosystem's function too, and how organisms are relating with each other. Yeah, as I mentioned, for me, right now, I'm not in a place where I can harvest, but some of the things that I have seen today that could be harvested, wild roses are blooming right now. And so out here in Bellingham, they've got the Nootka wild rose, the small pink flowered rose. Um, if you were looking to use it for aromatics, the leaves or the blossoms can be used. People will often harvest the blossoms and infuse them into jams, jellies, water. There's a cider maker out here that uses it in their ciders. That's very nice. Yeah, so those are going. Magnolias are also going out here on the West Coast. Saw lilac, which are going as well. Amazing for smell. Yeah, beyond just the internal consumption, that external medicinal application is of huge value. Just smelling things, looking at things, enjoying them, that can be really nice too. Anytime I'm picking something for aesthetic value, I'm also considering how much is here. If I pick these lilac blossoms and take them home, and I'll definitely enjoy them on the kitchen table or wherever they go. But is there enough that other people will still be able to continue enjoying them where they are? So I consider that too. Yeah, and then I showed the Mahonia earlier. Let's see what else is around us that I can show you. So we've got cleavers down here, and cleavers have medicinal value. They're also kind of fun because it's a sort of a Velcro-y thing. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's really really sticky. They've got these fine hairs that'll hook onto itself or onto your clothes. I had hanging out with a 5-year-old yesterday who made a crown of cleavers. So it can be fun for you and the little ones.
I usually call it sticky willies. That's what I've heard them called.
Yeah, sticky willies. I love it. Yeah, this one here is trailing blackberry. So it makes really tasty fruits. There are none on it right now, but they're pretty great when they fruit. This one's got flower, so those will come on in about a month or so. Ferns are an interesting one. Some people are really excited about the fiddlehead when it pops out in the spring. It really depends on the type of fern. I don't see any of it right now, but there is a fern in this region called the licorice root fern, which has really nice roots, sort of an anise smell to them, and that can be used as a flavor additive. There's also medicinal properties to that one too. Yeah, with the furs, the Doug fir and the grand fir both, you can harvest the pitch, and that's a pretty strong flavor, I find. I don't like it in large quantities, but it can help as an expectorant too. Just a little bit of that. Um, oh yeah, here we go. There are some new tips on this grand fir, or this Douglas fir, Pseudosugum and ZCI. That's the one. And you can pick the new growing tips as well, the really light color, and that gives you the same sort of flavor, a little less intense, a little bit more tart, still resiny, and that provides some vitamin C. Yeah, so those are some of the things around me. Were we gonna jump into, should I jump into what's in my foraging basket right now and what my setup looks like?
Yeah, we should skim through some of those. Let's do it.
Okay. So I got two baskets with me right now. One is my backpack with bottle of water in hand. Don't forget your water. Stay hydrated out there wherever you're going. And the backpack, I I use it when I have to. I have crushed a lot of things in it before, so I'll pick whatever it is and then get home and it's a little bit beat up. Call it bag fatigue. Um, yeah, so that's got, it's got pluses and minuses. It's got a lot of space in the bag. It's got a lot of different pouches where I can separate different things. And some of them will be a little bit safer. So if I've got something delicate, I may throw it in the side pouch. But yeah, and then I also have a willow basket with me. This is a friend's that I'm borrowing right now. You can see it's sort of wide and shallow, but not too much so. I find that something that's a little bit wider, a little shallower, is a bit nicer for foraging. I've got a snack, just in case you don't find what you're looking for. Um, I always have a knife with me. This helps um, not only just to pick things, but also to pick in a safe way for the plants. As I was mentioning, you want to damage plants as little as possible when we're picking from them. And it helps to keep things a little bit cleaner when harvesting too. So like if I'm foraging for mushrooms, sometimes it can be really nice to simply cut the stem rather than plucking the whole mushroom, just for cleanliness sake. There's a whole debate about pluck versus cut in the mushroom world, which is a fun side conversation to get into. But yeah, I also have some medicine for me. I get migraines, so I make sure that I've got the things that I need in my foraging kit to stay safe and happy and healthy while I'm out and about. On that note, I've got a headlamp right now, probably very unnecessary at this point, but if I go out in the woods or, just go walking around, even if I don't plan to be out at night, maybe I will be. It's always possible to get turned around in new places as well. Or just simply walking around at dusk. It can be nice to have a light if you're walking along the roadside. They can also be great to flag people down if you find yourself in a situation where you're requiring help. And then I've got a notebook. This one's a Write in the Rain. It also has I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's got a ruler on it, both in metric and imperial. So that way I can take pictures of things for identification. and keep detailed notes on what it is that I'm finding, what's around it, pertinent characteristics. I've got both a plastic bag and a cardboard carton for separating out different things that I find. I find this is especially important for mushrooms, but it can be great for plants too, to make sure that you're separating collections. And then the other, probably the most useful thing that I've got with me is the phone that I'm talking on right now. It is a great resource for learning about different plants and fungi and animals. And beyond foraging, just for getting to know the ecosystem around me, there are tons of great tools that are accessible through the phone. Like iNaturalist is one that I use a lot. There are different plant ID applications, lots of online communities and forums. And then a lot of the phones today have just like supremely high quality cameras. And so for documenting and taking photos, furthermore, for calling for help, if you're out and about, especially if you choose to go into the forest, it can be good to have a way to call somebody. I find this is especially important if we go alone. But yeah, safety first. Yeah, and then it also provides a map. So that helps people keep bearings, whether in the city or in the forest. So those are some of the things I got with me.
Cool. Thanks, y'all, for sharing. I want to riff off a little bit about like some of the plants that you mentioned, both of you, and picking them in abundance. So I don't have these particular plants on me, but since I am in the California area, I've been going on some awesome hikes and I have been doing some foraging, but even in areas that technically maybe you're not allowed, no one's really going to care if I pick like blackberries because they're so invasive, or red clover is invasive here as well. I thought I had some red clover in my pocket, which is one of my tools. So having lots of pockets, I have lots of pockets on my pants right now, in my long sleeve shirt. I love putting, like, if I have like a little small sub sample of something that I want to ID later, I just want a little taste, I put them in my pocket. So for me, I tend to just pick invasive, like quote unquote invasive, non-native, if they're really abundant and struggle, like making the natural ecosystem struggle in and of itself. I'm not going to hold back on foraging for those. One big one, excuse me, that I foraged for a lot yesterday were oats. So California is known as like the Golden State because of the grassland system. And funnily enough, I'm learning while I'm here that the golden color is mostly because of the non-native grasses that have come in because of a lot of cattle grazing, and general disturbance of the land that colonization has incurred. So picking the oats was extremely easy because they tend to tower over a lot of the other plants that are in bloom and growing right now. So my friend and I were just walking along the trail and grabbing handfuls of oats, which are highly medicinal, great for the nervous system. And we didn't plan on harvesting anything because we were just on a hike and not necessarily on like a foraging excursion. So we didn't have a basket, didn't have a backpack, didn't have a cardboard box. We didn't have anything really to carry these oats in, but we like really wanted them because they were in perfect condition. They were in the milky stage. So you crush the oat and a little milk latex comes out, and that's the perfect stage that you want to collect these oats in for the medicinal purposes. So we're like, oh dang, like we are out here, we want these oats, we want to collect them in abundance because or else it's not really going to be worth it if I just put a little bit in my pocket in this case, since the oats are relatively small, so you want kind of a lot. But we did have our hats, so all we did was filled our hats, and we filled them easily, fast. So that's just to say, like, you really can forage anywhere you go. with whatever you have, whether it's just a couple of little berries or red clover flowers that you put in your pocket, or like an abundance of medicine, like really a lot. We filled over a liter jar, mason jar, just from filling our hats each. So yeah, like I'm traveling, so I don't have a basket. I didn't check any luggage. So, but I still foraged anyways. It didn't hold me back. You just have tools with whatever you got. And this isn't even my hat. This is my friend's hat. I borrowed it. So that nothing should really stop you from foraging once you're like familiar with the plants and you're with people that know what they're doing and you're comfortable in your area. I'm really a proponent of whatever you've got on you, on your person, is going to be good enough, and shouldn't hold you back. I wanted to also mention borage. I saw a lot of borage recently, which is also a non-native and just like spreads like wildfire, also medicinal, and also one that you want to collect in abundance if you want to like actually benefit from anything that it has to give. It's beautiful blue flower, so it's also extremely special to put on your salads and things like that, because how often do you have like blue florals or leaves or anything in your salads? But again, one that I'm just absolutely not guilty collecting a lot of in this area because they're not really meant to be here. And they're kind of weedy if people like to use those terms, but that could be a whole other conversation about what weeds mean. I'm just looking at my notes to not forget that I also have one plant in my pocket that is native to here, and that you will, I'm sure anyone listening will be familiar with, and that I'm not going to put in my mouth. It's not necessarily, oh, I have two plants in my pocket. I didn't even know that. It's a culinary plant, but not one that you really want to swallow. It's a bay leaf. So it's a little crushed in my pocket because I crushed it on purpose because it smells amazing. It smells so good. And you want to smell it in moderation. Some people get headaches if you smell too much of it. Also nicknamed the headache tree. But in your spice cabinet, you probably have a bunch of these. And the trees are huge. So again, I don't mind harvesting any of them if I just want to, like, on a sweaty hike, you maybe don't like your smell, your deodorant maybe has run out. I just have some of these in my pocket, and I honestly forgot it was in my pocket earlier, and I was walking along, I was like, where are the bay trees? And then I realized I had this in my pocket. So foraging can like just be a part of all of your senses and all of your different types of joy. Similarly, there are a lot of sagebrush plants out here, in the Artemisia genus, I believe. Also smells really good. I just have like a little tiny bit left that was in my pocket. Another one that I just love to smell. It makes me so happy. And some people actually put it in their clothes drawer to ward away mothballs. And yeah, again, just having it in my pocket makes me happy and makes me smell better. That's all I have. Oh, and also I like to point out good shoes. Good shoes. If you're going foraging for a long time, I like to go barefoot sometimes when I can, but it's also just good, like Robbie said, to take care of yourself. And I'm a proponent for good shoes that work for you if you're going for a long time. I think that's all I got. Thanks, guys.
I just smelled that. I think it's Artemisia californica or californicum or something for the first time last weekend because I was in California for the weekend, and oh my God, I've never smelled anything like it before. It had like this, for me, it was like a great flavor smell, but I loved it. There's so many different ones out there. Yeah, it was great. I also like to forage for smells as well, whether it's like rubbing it on me. I've learned that the hard way too is plants that are unseemingly sharp. So just like be aware that rubbing it on clothing might be a better idea. You don't know if it's going to irritate your skin. And as we were thinking about safety things, we might make mistakes when we're foraging. We might misidentify something. Having a spicy smilax was a little bit alarming because it's like, I know it's smilax, so it's probably just something with where it was planted or this variety, but you know, it's some things, if it's on residential property, people might spray stuff, or if you accidentally misidentify something. One of my favorite things to keep in my foraging kit is activated charcoal. And activated charcoal is a great transition to get you to a higher level of care if you've figured out you ate something that is not safe, that is poisonous, or mildly toxic even. Or if it has like very, very mild toxicity, activated charcoal, if you're not feeling like it's a threat, is nice because it'll soak up all of that stuff and just protect you from that and leave the body that way. So that's one I keep in there. It's also really nice if you have any kinds of cuts and you're out camping for a while. It's really nice to prevent an infection, to soak it up that way. But this is a friend of mine because in my foraging adventures, I put a lot of stuff in my mouth, and I put a lot of things that are not actually edible in my mouth. I'm less haphazard of a forager now. I learned the hard way enough times, but I do now keep activated charcoal with me just in case I eat something that I shouldn't. So that's my safety precaution I will throw out at the beginning of my sharing of that. And I'll show and tell a few things that I have in my fancy foraging kit. This is a purse, but it's hard. So cool thing is I'm not going to crush what's in here unless I overpack it, which I sometimes do. But it's nice because it's also cloth lined. So it's got a soft interior right here. It's fashionable. I can go out on my city walk with my purse, but be inconspicuously foraging because this is full of foraging objects. I have a knife that my friend who's a blacksmith actually made for me because he knows how much I love foraging. It's got a really cool case. So that way I don't have a loose knife in my bag. And cool thing is I can also wear it when I'm foraging around my neck. And it's very easy that I can just pop out. And then it's got a small blade that's very sharp. You can tell I've still got some sap I need to clean off from today. It's also really good. Remember to care for your tools well. There's all sorts of stuff you can use the phone resource for tool care ideas. But that's one of my favorite items to have. I also typically bring, if I have a big enough bag, a pair of scissors. It makes a super clean cut. Maybe it's not as exciting as like a cool looking foraging knife, but it's my favorite tool to bring is just a pair of scissors. Even like the little nail clipper scissors that you get in your nail care kits. If I can keep that safely in a container or in my pocket with a stopper on the end of it, I'll bring just scissors. And that really helps me with foraging so I don't have a rough tear in a branch. Other things I keep in my bag is more bags, various sizes of mesh bags. This is great for many reasons. Drawstring bag. It helped me, let's see, I might have already moved it. I had another size that I put my magnolia flowers in, and because these are so delicate, it just kept it gently closed without totally crushing it. So it'll keep things separated still within my bag. And then there are, for identification, I bring a couple of things. If you are parsing out something that might be poisonous or might not, and there's a fine line between the two, or even if like just identification in general, maybe it's non-toxic, but you want to confirm what variety. I have this little pair of loops that I love to bring with me. So you can get all up in there super close. And I keep that in a kit in there. It's very helpful for identification. And I love what you said, Robbie, when you had the notebook, you said you can record it, or said like take a picture of it or record a photo of it, but you were referencing your notebook. And it's like, that's the best way to do it, is to draw it, to capture a picture of it. And it's really fun then to practice botanically correct drawing of noticing how do the veins branch in this leaf, or what's the texture of the bark. So that way you could even take it back home and consume information in a slow way of like, ask a friend first, then read a book next, then maybe consult the Google, or even bring a guide. So I've got my Trees of the Carolinas guide here, which is fun, but there's some guides that are dichotomous keys where it's like, if not this, then that. So you can branch your way into identifying different plant species and mushrooms and animals and insects. Other things I keep in here are masking tape and a Sharpie. So I can also, this is not a Sharpie. This is a Sharpie. End of the day, y'all, almost a Friday. So I'll wrap around the base of some stems my masking tape, and then I'll label it with Sharpie, especially if it's a new identification for me. That way I don't have to look it up again when I get back. I can just do that once. If I'm on a longer trip where it's something dried, I might even put a date on it. I have a brain that sometimes just forgets things. So dating things is a helpful practice of mine. Other little tools that are like ridiculously convenient yet simple. I keep a little clip of rubber bands. This is for bundling things together, because having a tidy small foraging basket is, one, just very pleasing for me. I enjoy it, but it also prevents you from like dumping out and it's just a bunch of stuff all mixed together. It keeps things nicely separated, because you might not want the dust or pollen from a magnolia to get all tangled up in your mushrooms, or these little twigs or leaves you separated that you're putting in a tea. You want to keep separate from something else that is slimy that you keep in a jar. And that's the other thing I always bring, a jar, and it just fell off, but with a lid. I always bring a jar with a lid, because it's another hard container. Or if there's something squishy like berries that I want to eat later, doesn't do well in the bag, or pockets. And I've done both of those. It sounds like y'all have either done it or seen people do it, just by your look. So another jar, even a tiny jar with a lid, is great. So it's important to know how to preserve your plants too. If I have a sealed jar like that, sometimes by my basket, I'll fill jars with either water, vinegar, or alcohol if I want to infuse it on site and preserve it immediately if it's very fragile or tender. Or my newest thing I'm so excited to start doing, I have to get the culture going, but my favorite thing to forage is wild yeast for my sourdough. So you can literally take your sourdough culture on a walk with you through the forest and forage wild yeast. You can do it for vinegars, for wines, for hooch, what have you. It's something that you might not think of right away. And then the last thing I'll share, because foraging kits can go on and on. If you were to Google foraging kits, if capitalism even got the best of that, you can buy a kit from anywhere. But I like to bring a vegetable peeler, because I like to harvest bark from lots of different types of twigs. My favorite one I'm harvesting right now is the mimosa tree. It's the mimosa bark, in addition to the flowers that I love, and that one's more medicinal properties. And it's green enough bark, tender enough that I can just strip it, and I'm not carrying a stack of mimosa branches back with me. So ways to make your things smaller and easier to carry is really, and how to preserve them is the best tools. Whatever tools can help you do that are probably tools that are going to be great for foraging. And so there's many more things we could say about this, and I do want to be mindful of time, but something that is, I know, very important to each of us here is to just note a few things that some haven't yet, about the honorable harvest and what that is. We've talked about it in the context of quantity a little bit, but there's much more to it than that. And I will let one of y'all start with that, so I can not ramble on that. I can get very overexcited about that topic.
Sure, yeah, I'll go for it. You can even Google honorable harvest. So this is something that is written about in Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. But if you don't have a copy of that book, well, first of all, I recommend you get a copy of that book, because it's the most important book I think I've ever read. But also, if you don't want to wait until you have your copy in hand, or your Audible copy, you can look it up on the internet. I made sure that you could do this because I wanted to make sure that it was true. And the list is right there. And in the book, Robin Wall Kimmerer does mention that this is not necessarily something that is written down and that is exhaustive or comprehensive, but something that is practiced in daily life as a means to be respectful to the earth and as humans, as part of nature. So one of the parts of the honorable harvest is to not take the first one that you see and not take the last one that you see. So even if you are under the impression that what you're seeking or what you see is in abundance in your area, maybe it's not, or maybe that's the first one that's popped out in the season, and that's actually really important for the ecosystem because pollinators need that early flowering, whatever it is. So it's generally a good practice to maybe honor the first plant or fungi that you see in your ecosystem, even though it looks delicious and really valuable to you. move on and hope that you see another one later. Similarly, if you know that what you're looking at is the last either of the season or maybe hopefully not of that patch or the species, certainly you don't want to be responsible for making an organism go extinct, even locally. So organisms can go extinct in a local sense, so they might exist somewhere else in the world, but the local patch is really important for that ecosystem. So if you're under the impression that what you're looking at is the last in existence of that area, it's a really good idea to leave that organism behind and let the ecosystem benefit from that organism still being in existence there locally. Another one that I like, part of the honorable harvest, is to never take more than half and leave some for others. So this, in my experience, and I'd love to hear other opinions on this too, half is really generic. Some organisms, maybe you want to only take a third, maybe you want to only take a quarter, maybe you can take 3/4. It really depends on the organism. So it helps to read up and ask people that know how that organism functions in the ecosystem. And perhaps you want to be very mindful of how much you're going to be taking. And we've talked a little bit about that today, especially with regards to non-native organisms. Another one from the honorable harvest is use it respectfully and never waste. So what that means is maybe the common saying is your eyes were too big or bigger than your stomach. Is that the saying? Something like that. So that can happen at the dinner table, but it can also happen when you're foraging. So maybe you found like a delicious patch of chanterelles or I don't know, red clover, whatever it might be. And you're like, wow, I want all of this and I want it now. But later on, you know, you're not going to have time to process all of that. You don't have anyone to share it with. And maybe you're just going to be composting like half of what you harvested, or maybe if you don't have compost in your area, worse, you're going to throw it in the garbage. That's not really respectful, and it's like really sad. So, and you know, I did that when I first started. Like sometimes you just get over excited about finding something that you've been looking for. It's in abundance and you want to collect all of it. So you live and learn. And so that's why I'm here to tell you, perhaps think about what you actually have time for in terms of later processing and how you're going to use it so that that doesn't go to waste. I'll just say one more, also being conscious of time. And that is in the honorable harvest, it's a practice to give thanks for what you might be harvesting. So, and that can be a number of ways you can give thanks, whether that's a prayer of gratitude, actually offering something. So maybe a lock of hair, a bit of your hair, yeah, or spit even, which is really good in a drought prone area like California, or maybe even some water from your water bottle, or maybe you brought something from home in exchange, burning something that's important and sacred to you. You know, there's lots of ways to give thanks for what you have taken from the environment. And that's, for me, a really important distinction on how our society functions right now in general, in that we are mostly extractive and not living in reciprocity and not giving back. So this foraging habit could expand philosophically and practically to other ways of going about your life as well. But I'll stop there. There's plenty more to talk about the honorable harvest, and I'd love to hear from y'all. And I think maybe we need to close the call soon also.
Yeah, there is one thing that I thought of. I also I like scissors because then I can cut a tiny piece of hair off and leave that. I'll bring other little blends, like I have little teas or smoking blends I'll bring and put in the ground. Whatever plant feels true to me, like it's actually an offering and not just me consuming somewhere else and then giving someone else's gift. And that's what feels right for me. The other thing is, Krisz, you introduced me to this idea, which was introduced to you by another friend, that humans can be a keystone species in an ecosystem. That's like something, a vision we can hold, a role of great importance, so much that an ecosystem can thrive and depend on us in a positive way that brings more life. I know you call yourself a life giver in that way, and I really love that. So I think about that in terms of knowing how these plants propagate themselves. You know, birds are naturally reciprocal by eating seeds and then shitting them out, and then they can propagate much better. It's not like you have to do that, but you can also have maybe wind distributed seeds and plants that I'll walk by them and I'll give the tree a good shake and make sure it disperses a little bit more as a thank you. Or if there's ways that if I know a plant actually does better with dispersing instead of being under a mother tree, again, good to know your plant, maybe I can carry it a little bit further to where I still see that its needs will be met in the ecosystem with sunlight, soil conditions, or similar plants around it. So that was one that I just thought I would add. And I think what you said is also what I am in agreement with what I call the honorable harvest, thanks to Dr. Kimmerer.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. Yeah, really just pick up a copy of Braiding Sweetgrass if you hadn't. The audiobook is amazing too. I could have Dr. Kimmerer talk me to sleep every night. Yeah, so you'll do well to pick that up. Yeah, on the idea of helping plants disperse themselves, harvesting can also be a pretty wicked tool for plant conservation and for ecological conservation. So in some instances, maybe you will intentionally collect the seed from a rare plant in order to propagate it at home and then plant it out back into a landscape and help plants to propagate and grow when they're in vulnerable conditions, or if it's an area that's about to be disturbed for housing development or something like that. So it's really pretty endless, the world of foraging. I find it can help to develop amazing community too. And a couple of things that we've sort of danced around that I feel may be important to mention before we close. As we're talking about reconnecting and deepening land-human relationships, and picking things or going out on our own into the forest, I think it's important to consider safety and the bodies that we're in as well, and the cultural context, and learning about what that means and how to be respectful of those things, not only to be safe on our own, but also to help others to feel like they can step into these spaces. And so I know we've got some resources that we can share for anybody who's checking out this recording and wants to see them. So I won't say too much more on any of that due to time, but I want to thank both of you all for this conversation. It's been rad. Always great talking about this stuff and sharing space with you both.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. This has been a joy. I'm excited for those of you who are listening to receive some of the resources we have to share. Robbie's final note on plant propagation in terms of what I think of as blending this idea of cultivated spaces and wild spaces where we can be that intersectional practice is definitely something that we're going to be exploring together as facilitators for a course called, or an immersion rather, called The Wild and the Cultivated at the end of July in Hot Springs, North Carolina. So if this was intriguing to you, and especially so the anthropological, cultural, historical context of this that I know we also get excited about, then I definitely suggest exploring that on the Revival Rituals website. It's just revivalrituals.com/retreats. And you can find it there listed amongst many experiences such as this, some of the free fun offerings we have, like these foraging workshops.
Thank you all. Thanks so much for listening. Love talking about this stuff with you. Hope you have a good rest of your day.
We can't wait to hear from you. Thanks.